Hello, and welcome to Watch Wisely, the podcast that looks at movies through an educational lens, answering the question, is this a film that would help my students understand what I'm trying to teach them? I am your host and the namesake of this podcast, Dr. Karen Wisely. Today I'm enjoyed by a young friend and colleague, Mau Garza, and we will be talking about the 2006 motion picture Apocalypto. It is our custom, before we get into the discussion, that I introduce the movie by reading the logline or brief description of the film and then go over some of the main cast members and where you may have seen them before. As I've said many times before, this type of information helps me enjoy a film more when I'm watching it, so I hope it helps some of you as well. The logline for Apocalypto is, as the Mayan kingdom faces its decline, a young man is taken on a perilous journey to a world ruled by fear and oppression. It stars, before I tell you that, I'm going to give you some names, but I wanted to tell you that I watched this entire movie and I only knew two of the characters by name. So this was incredibly difficult to do because a lot of these folks had never starred in anything else. So even on IMDb, there weren't pictures of them. And I'm like, who is that? I've never heard of that name before. So here's what we have. Rudy Youngblood was Jaguar Paw. He was the main character and one of the people who are actually referred to by their name. The other was his son, Turtles Run. This was Youngblood's first film, and he has only made a handful since 2006, so I'd be really surprised if you'd seen him in anything. Gerardo Terracina as Middle Eye, again, did not have any idea that was his name. He was the main baddie, and the really mean one. The other baddie was not so mean, but then turned mean later. Oh, God. Never saw him called by this name. Anyhow, he has been in other films like Sin Nobre and Man on Fire. And guys, I love Man on Fire with Denzel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark Anthony, right?
Yeah. And well, because that was a remake of a previous Man on Fire, in case you didn't know that. And the Denzel one, I love. It's so violent and so beautiful. I don't remember him in this movie. I don't remember. Yeah. So obviously small part. Lastly, there is Raul Max Trujillo. And he played Zero Wolf, who was never called Zero Wolf. And I question Zero. Did they have Zero in the Mayan Empire? Because
I don't know what time period Mel Gibson is trying to talk about, so it's really hard to diagnose. But
right.
let's say that they do. They have.
Okay,
yeah, let's
right.
give him
Okay.
some slack.
All right, let's say that.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, for those of you at home, he was the guy, the main baddie with the jawbones on his shoulder. That should clear it up for you. And he has been in some major movies like Sicario and Riddick in the past. So you may recognize him. I did through the whole thing. I was like, he looks kind of familiar. Apocalypto was directed by Mel Gibson and was released in 2006. Now, before we go any farther, I have to say about Mel Gibson. I was recently asked by a colleague on Facebook the question, what instantly ruins a historical movie? And just to be pithy, I said Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
I remember when this came out, and everyone was like, oh, man, it's so accurate. It's just like Braveheart, only for, and
It was more true than they knew. More true than they knew.
Yeah. So we're going to ask the expert. Mau is the expert. And just a little bit of word about Mau. You study, as I understand, Mesoamerican and colonial Mexican history, right?
Yeah.
And Mau will soon be abandoning us to start the PhD program at University of Rochester in upstate New York. So, Mau,
Yeah.
tell me,
Okay.
what did you think about this movie?
It's hard because I don't know what to lean into because I don't know what the hell he's talking about for most of the movie. So it's really hard to know where to even start with the critique. But I think it's a very bad movie. I think we can do better, and I really hate when people are like, oh, but it's like the only movie about Mesoamerica, and so we need to give it some sort of slack or something like that, I would say. But I think it's very very informative for students watching movies with a historical inclination, because I don't want to say historically accurate at all throughout this podcast, because it shows that, you know, you can go get an expert, and the expert can be a garbage human being, as is the expert that they referred to here. You can go film things in Guatemala, in Mexico, and it still be historically inaccurate. And mostly when you go into an idea with your mind already made up, when you go into, an idea, a film, a project, whatever, with your mind made up, it's probably going to be trash. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, all right, so I want to kind of start with the opening line, because as the film opens, there's a line of words on there that says, "A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within," and it's attributed to a man named Will Durant. And who is that? If you were not lucky enough, which none of you are, to have watched this movie with Mau's notes, which, by the way, really added to my enjoyment of this movie, I will help you out a little bit with who the heck Will Durant is. Will Durant and his wife, Ariel Durant, and we will come back to her in a minute, were celebrated in the New York Times in 1975 as, quote, the greatest historians of our time, unquote. Now, the problem with that is that they are not historians. Now, this is all part of a much larger rant that I have for another day, but I will just say that Will Durant had a PhD in philosophy. That does not make him a historian. That makes him a philosopher, which they're fine people. Philosophers are.
They're okay. Yeah, right.
But they're not historians. His wife, Ariel, had no historical degrees. I couldn't find she had any degrees, but that doesn't matter. She was not a trained historian. Neither was Will Durant. These two imposters were best known for their masterpiece, which was an 11-volume work called The Story of Civilization, that proposed to tell the biography of civilization, whatever that means. But understand what they meant by civilization was Western civilization. So white supremacy is baked right in to the 10 of the 11 volumes. The first volume was about the title of it was Our Oriental Roots.
Oh, God.
And so they got a little bit of Asian stuff in there, but the whole rest of it was Greece and Rome and England and all of that. And these two clowns, this is just...
Don't hold back.
Oh, God. They did no original research. They compiled secondary sources that had been written, by the way, 100 years ago, so completely out of date.
For their time,
yeah.
It should be said. Yeah, for the 70s that they were out of date. Yeah.
And in 1967, they won the Pulitzer Prize in Literature for their 10th volume that was called Rousseau and Revolution. Then in 1977, President Gerald Ford awarded them the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in this country. Here's the part that I found most compelling, disgusting about them. The couple met at Farrer Modern School in New York City, where Will was a teacher and Ariel was a student whose name was Ida Kaufman. Ida Kaufman. You may be asking, why then do I call her Ariel? Because she had her name legally changed to Ariel because that's what Will called her. They were married in 1913 when Will was 27 years old and Ida was 15. She roller skated to their wedding at New York City's City Hall from her family's home in Harlem. That's so gross. It's so gross. Oh my God. Like I can't even. So that's how the movie starts. And then it just gets better and better because the first scene is hunting some sort of large animal.
It's a pier, I believe, that it's supposed to be.
I mean, that's what they said, but
it's not the sounds that the animal is making. And I wasn't going to bring it up until they brought it up themselves. I'm a big believer that, when there's sounds in space, I'm not sitting in, the theater like there's no sound in space. But whenever you make it a point to highlight that you should win points for your accuracy, I start taking points away as well. And so the fact that they went out of their way to get one of these animals, there had to be a discussion at some point where it's like, we just can't get it to make a sound like a wild boar. And I think that the American audience is really going to identify with the fear of a wild boar running through the jungle. I don't know why that creative decision was taken.
Yeah. I think it's very kind of you to say creative.
I'm going to try to be kind because I'm going to be so mean. So, I am trying to balance some of that out. Let's get past that, though. Let's get past the quote, which as soon as it opened, I had a moment where I had to either acknowledge that I do care for you quite a lot as a human or just stop watching it altogether.
I just want the listeners to know that you sent me an email. He sent me an email with the notes in it and said, "I hate you for making me watch this movie again."
Yeah. I did do that, and I stand behind that because I realized at the end that it wasn't worth it, and if I just would have backed out at the start, then everything would have been fine.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah,
I would have been sad. No one wants that.
My first note, though, and anyone that goes back and watches this movie, please ask yourself, why is everyone in this movie covered in dirt? And why are their teeth so disgusting where it looks like they've been drinking Coca-Cola every day for about 20 years without brushing? These are the pressing...
They are very vivid.
At some point, they walk through neck-high river. It's like the fastest river I've ever seen. And they still come out covered in shoe polish, and I don't understand why that happened. But that was just kind of my first note when looking at them. Yeah.
Well, that's it because it's a choice. Obviously,
it is.
It's a choice.
Absolutely.
And then you have to ask yourself, why did Mel Gibson make this choice? And I think we know the answer to that.
Sure. But even then, that should be something that people really do look with a critical eye. As funny as we find it, it's like, what did these actors not look enough like to warrant this makeup choice by an Italian makeup artist that in his justification for doing research, he says there's a little doohickey that comes down from the ear through the nose. That was entirely their artistic innovation. How much research can you do without knowing what the thing is called and having to call it a doohickey?
The doohickey.
That upset me a lot when reading that afterwards.
That's not the official name?
I don't think it is. My mind is rusty, I must admit. I'm more of a Nahuatl speaker, but yes, I don't think that doohickey would be the word they would have used at the time. And then another thing that kind of is throughout the movie is this idea of the noble savage, I feel like is constant throughout the movie, right? Where it's like, yes, they may be running around the Amazon, which is what it looks like.
Yeah.
But look, they have this cool little Indiana Jones pulley system type thing. And then it's like, okay, like, But real quick, though, I do have to ask you a question. I promised I'd ask you this question. And,
Okay.
but the lights made me forget them. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the Mayans, which peaked at 900 AD? Or are we talking about the Aztecs that entered the basin around 1345 and then, up until conquest? Typically, we use the fall of Tenochtitlan, right, to decide that, 1521. Who are we supposed to be talking about? Because every time I thought I knew, I didn't.
Yeah, he does change. I mean, the log line says the fall of the Mayan.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
even that leaves you with questions, right?
It does. It does. Well, and this is where I'm going to be unfair to Mel Gibson, to be fair to the Mayan people that continue to exist and, have a lot of issues brought about by the Mexican, Guatemalan governments, eminent domain being a big one. The Mayans do survive past the year 900 AD, and I do think it is important to say that. But I don't understand what was depicted in this movie that I watched. It looks like, this may show my age a little bit, but I remember on the VHS of Jungle to Jungle, great movie, by the way. Everyone watched Jungle to Jungle, cinematic masterpiece. There was this deep voice, and it would be like, "We must save the rainforest. Like these people that have nothing and are also covered in dirt always need our help, and for $3 a day you can save the Amazon rainforest." And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, the Amazon, it looks like they're struggling, right? And I assumed that Mel Gibson watched the same thing and thought, man, we need to make a movie about why they destroyed themselves.
Yeah.
Apparently.
But it needed to be that they destroyed themselves.
Well, just the way that they're depicted. There's no cultural, maybe cultural sophistication, maybe we could say, right? And what they're wearing, everybody's just wearing weird thong things, which, wouldn't, have always been the case. They are in the middle of the rainforest, proper dense rainforest, and a civilization that prioritizes maize as much as the Mayans do, in the sense of where they're humans only survive because of maize.
Yeah.
To think that there's this weird little outlier after the collapse of the classical Mayan that still exist and are being hunted for motivations that I still can't figure out after watching the movie and the extra credit, because I don't know why I did the second part. But it really brings in a lot of questions for me as to what the goal was. And once I can diagnose the goal, I can diagnose the results. But I don't think that there was a goal in mind other than look at how disgusting and savage these people are, even though I'm going to pat them on the back in a few scenes to make it seem like I'm unbiased. Didn't they deserve to be wiped out for not embracing God? That's the only kind of conclusion that I can come to as far as what this movie was trying to say and do.
Yeah, and I think he was very, I think, literally upfront about what his goal was, and that was in the opening statement about showing that it wasn't, it wasn't the Westerners, it wasn't the Spaniards coming over that destroyed these native people. It was because of the way that they lived.
Right. Yeah.
And yes, there's a huge religious component to this, because the ritual that they were doing. It always gets about 15, 20 minutes into this, and we're like, oh, spoiler alert, because of course we're going to talk about this movie.
Oh yeah, we should.
But I mean, first of all, it's 17 years old. Second of all, you're supposedly listening to this to find out what historians or experts actually think about it. So you shouldn't be surprised by spoilers. So I think that there is definitely a religious component to the looking down their nose kind of thing at these folks, is because of the ritual of gutting those people and pulling out their still beating heart, which I don't think that's even possible.
There's a quote that I wanted because I think it's important,
Okay.
and I remind myself as I'm reading a lot of these accounts.
Yeah.
Originally, it's by Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I'll modify it a little bit.
God.
And that is that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you, and I take out the universe part and I usually add history to that because I don't think these people were doing this on purpose in the sense of understanding what it would look like to us. We're then doing it for the shock factor. I think that we need to look at these people in their own terms and assume that there is some deep logic as to what they were doing and why they were doing that. And whether that aligns with us now or not doesn't really matter because to us, I mean, the world was very different in, again, I don't know what date to put this movie in, but let's say in the 1500s, the world, the Western world, the Christian world, however you want to say it, I mean, is also going through a lot of changes. And we don't look at them as like, oh, you guys are so stupid. Why did you allow the Muslims to conquer all of the Iberian Peninsula essentially and then wait 700 years to take it back over? Like that's not a thing that we typically.
No. And if I think that if we made movies about like the Spanish Inquisition and some other things that are equally as savage as
Right.
Gutting these people and pulling a beating heart out. I
Right.
mean, if you saw what they were doing to people in those instances, you would be horrified too.
Yeah.
But I think that because based on Mel Gibson's past and his all of this is.
And present and
Yeah.
likely future. I mean,
Yeah, and he still is out there
Right.
making freaking movies.
And we're paying for them. That's another thing. We are paying for them,
Yeah.
and that's I just want to bring that to all the audience. It's like as long as you watch it, even if it's a novelty, they have your money and they don't care.
Yeah. So I think just knowing him, that he focused on the quote savagery of their religion because he always wants to make his religion seem
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah,
Well,
like the right choice.
and a lot of these like producers and makeup artists and stuff were the Christians that land at the the Christians that land at the end. They dressed up so that they could be the ones that are spreading religion.
They're coming to save everyone.
To save everyone,
Yes.
absolutely. And there's a lot of
From themselves,
Yeah.
mainly.
I mean, here's from the producer and screenwriter where he says, but also we wanted to illuminate the brutal undercurrent and ritual savagery that they practiced, they being the Mayans. It was a far more interesting world to explore why and what happened to them. And it doesn't sound like they explored that.
No, because they're making causation kind of assumptions.
It's very Whiggish, right?
Yeah.
It's incredibly Whiggish, where it kind of seems like they know
It's
what
like,
they want to tell.
because you were savage, that's why you were
ultimate-
destroyed.
To a
And-
superior people. I mean, I don't want to jump too ahead, but right? I mean, that's ultimately what
Yeah.
it seems to be like. But I would say we can build up to that if you'd like. One of the things that I saw that really disturbed me is there's a scene where this old storyteller is talking about taking too much, right? And to this village, which we'll get into in a second. I didn't know I assumed I knew who Too Much was referring to, but the thing I hate about this is that this is a modified Mayan text that they had someone speak Yucatec Mayan and then modified it to fill the role of this movie, and that drives me insane. I can't describe how angry that genuinely makes me. And especially because their history advisor has also been accused by many, many people for his, quote, blatant acts of white supremacy. So, yeah.
So, It seems to me if you were in good faith wanting to make a movie about the Mayans, and you wanted to include text,
Yeah.
that you would take the text as it was written and then form the movie around that instead of here's my movie, here's the text, let me form the text around what I want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, when you are very openly creating a historical fiction, right? I mean, I think we can all agree that Mel Gibson isn't trying to tell us that Jaguar Paul, is that right? Yeah. Existed and did all of whatever it is that he, like, you know, the Jungle Home Alone sequence that we get at the end. So, yeah, I'm kind of, again, I'm just very confused by what this movie is trying to accomplish, pretty much the entire point. One thing that I should say is that I don't understand what this village is or why they thought that any recognizably Mayan village would look like this.
Yeah.
Post-classic or classical, again, you would really clear everything out because you have to grow maize.
Yeah.
I mean, I granted I haven't spent too much time in rainforests, but I don't think you can really hunt to feed a village of 30 people or whatever number we want to attribute to that. I don't think you can subsist off of that, and that's why they didn't. And they grew maize and had roofs and rocks, because, you know, that's not a Western innovation, even though it seems like they're baffled by rocks later, which I want to say I'm confused by, but it's just mostly anger, I think. Yeah.
I do want to point out that you, in your notes that you sent, that made me giggle a lot while watching this movie, said that it was 1 hour and 26 minutes in before we got maize.
Yeah, I believe that's about right. An hour and 24 minutes in, we finally see corn.
Okay, there we go. There we
Yeah.
go.
And
Yeah,
I was
and
looking for
By the way, it wasn't like fresh. It was.
No.
It was,
Yeah.
So that would put it in the autumn, I guess. Of the, yeah, because it looked like it had been drying there in the field for a while.
Right.
So yeah. So, God, the one identifiable thing that probably, if you asked most people, well, we'll call them normal people on the streets,
Sure.
hey, what do you know about the Mayans? They would tell you what? Probably corn, maybe corn, maybe some
calendar,
corn,
I
maybe
don't
the
know.
calendar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which-
and frankly, I'm surprised they didn't.
Yeah. I did note in my notes that this is pre-2012, so people like.
They weren't really concentrating on the calendar.
No, well, they were, right? Because they were still like, what if the world ends? And it's like, now you listen to the Mayans? Like now's the time to listen to the Mayans after you've thoroughly destroyed them, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah,
What else?
yeah. I don't know about that village. Yeah, and okay? So at one point they met another group of people.
Which I was also confused by. But,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah.
who like threw some fish at him, and those people look sickly and frail and thin, and they had a whole bunch of fish on them. And so what it told me is that you shouldn't eat fish.
That's why I took it out of it.
That's
I'm
what
happy
I-
that we came to that
yeah.
conclusion. It's why
Okay.
I don't eat fish,
It's
by the way.
yeah, because
Yeah.
it's
And
like,
also that like one like leg of any non-fish things is worth 3 times the amount of fish, I think, is the conversion rate that I was looking at.
yeah, it looked like yeah.
Yeah.
And that so don't eat fish is what I took from it, and
Yeah.
which seems like a weird lesson for a Catholic like Mel Gibson to be.
It's the best lesson that he attempted in this film, so you know I'll give it to him. You know, if that's what it is. Just,
So yeah, that was weird. The hunting was weird. We're just not going to address the
the noble savage trope in the village.
no.
Okay.
No. I mean the
I think we're talking about the same thing.
I think the testicle joke, the testicle scene, and then the other testicle scene, where he
yeah.
rubbed that pepper on himself because it was a big funny joke, which I guess is showing us that even the Mayans had frat boys. Is that what that's about?
Yeah, but on a serious note, though, I do think it bleeds into that noble savage kind of thing that he's got going on, where they're like, look, but they know about medicine, but they use it to play jokes on each other. It's really uncomfortable to watch because I think it's wrong to disconnect ourselves from, Mel Gibson spent millions of dollars, directed this in the sense that he got a lot of people together over the course of months to be like, no, this is crucial to the movie. Like this wasn't left on the editing floor. Yeah. This wasn't like fluff because this movie is way too long. So if it's in there, I assume he wants it there. And if he wants it there, I have the right to criticize it, is the way that I look at it. But to that point, though, let's go over, let's kind of get past that, because I don't want to talk about that either. I don't even know where to start. I don't understand the motivations for attacking this, quote, village.
Doesn't give any kind of indication of why they're doing it.
Because can I sell you on human sacrifice for a little bit? Like, as a human sacrifice enthusiast, can I sell you on human sacrifice here for a second?
I mean, you can try.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let me try to present it maybe the way that some of these, cultures would have looked at it. When you think of the weapons that they use, which a lot of them, by the way, are terrible in the movie. There's only a few, like a couple that I was like, oh, okay. But it's mostly obsidian, and for the listeners that may not know, obsidian is essentially glass. I mean, it's volcanic glass. And so the thing is that when you hit somebody with obsidian, you usually would try to shave off, so you have this kind of studded thing, and you want to drag it so it cuts in deep. What that means is that I question the lethality of a lot of these weapons. And so most human sacrifices that I've read are this admiration for your opponent. And so it's like, that's definitely a killing blow. I can let you bleed out on the battlefield over 3-4 days, however long it takes you to die, because the obsidian fractures as well, so you have a lot of wounds. Or I can take you to the pyramids, to our gods, and help you, like, use your soul almost to kind of fuel the god. So you're going to fight alongside the sun god. I think there's a lot more decorum to the human sacrifices of Mesoamerica. And so I think that it's really important to note that when the Spanish show up and they start getting into little, like, kind of battle skirmishes, whatever you want to call them, the Nahuas, Aztecs, are horrified. Because they're like, this guy was one of the greatest warriors for 10 years, and you're just gonna let him die out on a battlefield. Like, what a waste of a life. Why wouldn't you let him die like a warrior? It's weird that American society can I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, can like the concept of Bushido and stuff like that as much as Americans have been known to do. And then to see another form of it 400 years before the concept of Bushido really exists and be disgusted by it and say that is why genocide befell you, because you should die for doing what we romanticize other cultures for doing. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, but that is not at all how it was portrayed.
No. Thus my anger. No.
It's perfectly healthy, perfectly fit.
Absolutely. And another note, right, is that these empires, quote unquote, they're not really empires the way that we would think about it today. They're city-states, right, that have, they have allegiances to each other sometimes they don't, as any organic kind of states have. It was really big on the tilmas, which is what people would have worn, which they don't wear in this, of course. if you guys, if the viewers watch Wakanda Forever, Tenoch Huerta, the guy who plays Namor, he wears a tilma in a lot of scenes where he's not, on the battlefield, which should have been a bit more accurate. But they would have, in tie-dye, had your ethnicity printed onto your tilma. And so we know that ethnicity and stuff like that was very important to these people. And, to kind of show them with no sense of identity within one another. They're all speaking Mayans, and I'll give him some credit for that. But if this is with the Aztecs, which I think is what he's going for, the universal language would have been Nahuatl. Yeah. And we know that because Hernan Cortez, his translator, Lama Linching, she's Mayan. But why does she speak Nahuatl? Because that's, the universal language that these people would have spoken to each other. And so the fact that everybody's just kind of understanding each other with these loose Mayan, but have never heard of the other thing or heard of roads or anything like that. Like, I don't understand what Mel Gibson is doing. So I'm just ultimately confused by what he's trying to show. Because in a tributary state, right, you want that side to be crippled enough from your attack to where they're not going to attack you back, but they still have to make you stuff. That's how it works. And so all these separate city-states are just part of a tributary state that have an agreement with what we would call the Aztecs, the Nahuas, Mexicas. For the sake of the viewer, I'm going to use Aztecs, even though I can hear mentors telling me I'm awful for doing so. Yeah. So why would they have loyalty to these people that recognize themselves as a different ethnicity, speak a different language? What is this inner empire collapse? Because the quote of the Great Civilization is referring to Rome, which was not a city, a group of city-states in a tributary system.
Empire, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And so from the start, why would you burn down the village of a thing that you assume want to be a tributary state? Why are you taking these people in with you if they're not good warriors? At the end of the day, it's either you believe this religion or you don't. If you believe this religion, you believe that you need to have great warriors to sacrifice. You're essentially coming back and saying, like, look, and I got some of their most, elite soldiers, and we're going to sacrifice them because they're probably going to die from their wounds or, die, any other way. I didn't get any of that.
No.
Yeah. And that upsets me a lot.
No, he belittled him by calling him almost, right? I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. And I wrote that in my notes, right? The disrespect to the captives just wouldn't have happened. We know that, at least in the case of the Nahuas, that whenever you would take on a captive, you as the captor, you were supposed, there was decorum around it. There was like a religious decorum. You would call that person your son. They would refer to you as father. It was very kind of mutual. You would walk up with them to get sacrificed. I mean, it was a really sacred and intimate thing that was typically defined by from one warrior to another. You came out here, you got dressed, you did your best. You shouldn't just die out like a common pleb, I suppose. And yet they're going through the jungle for common plebs to sacrifice to this pyramid that we'll get into that pyramid. So yeah, I was very confused by that. Did that make you feel anything?
I mostly didn't understand most of what was happening. I'll be honest with you. Like I came into it. I'm not as obviously as knowledgeable about this area as you are, but I came into it already with the feeling of, oh, this is Mel Gibson. This is gonna be trash, and just like everything that I saw, I was like with a grain of salt, and I knew as soon as we saw Jaguar Paw and his wife, I guess, and that child, something about turtles, I don't remember. As soon as he picked up that kid and gave that kid a name, because no one else had a name except for him, you know. And I was like, oh, something bad's gonna happen, you know. And I don't really understand. No, I don't understand the purpose of going, because they had to travel for a long freaking time to get back to their thing.
Right.
So why are we traveling all the way out there, just like, I guess, sweeping the jungle and be like, hey, is there any villages in here we can destroy or whatever, and for absolutely no gain? They got nothing out of it except for these people that they were gonna then sacrifice. But then also what I didn't understand is the mother-in-law. Okay, the mother-in-law, they tried to sell as a slave, but nobody wanted her because she was too old and she's useless or no good or whatever, and then they just let her go.
It's the noble savage trope, I think, right?
Okay.
I mean,
but then during the sacrifice, not to give anything away, there's an eclipse, which I know you have feelings about, because of how they responded to it, which was insane. But then they decided, oh, okay, the human sacrifice is over, get rid of these guys, and they didn't just let them go. They're like, then played this stupid game with them, like, oh, you can run across this field, and if you make it to the corn.
I think it's just emphasizing the sadistic nature that Mel Gibson thinks that these people have within them.
Like, because there's no indication that kind of gamesmanship was happening with these folks, right? I mean, there isn't, right?
I mean, it's rough because there's a lot of stuff we just don't know.
Yeah.
There's you know, some people think that there's like these references to like flower wars, where they're either like mock wars, or sometimes what you would do with somebody like that, and I assume what would have happened is that they would have taken him to the bottom of the pyramid, and there was rituals where they would essentially tie you up to like a ring, you know, let's say, and you would just kind of have your last stand to see how many people you can take down, and they'd give you a weapon covered in feathers that was supposed to kind of show, you know, like there's a lot of ritual importance to that I won't get into, but that's the thing. Everyone in this movie is really, really religious when it forces them to make the stupidest decision humanly imaginable and then forget about their religion whenever it makes them look as sinister as humanly possible. And that is one of those things about this movie that I don't understand what's happening. The leader, did we say Zero Wolf? That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a cool name. Sounds like a Metal Gear character. Yeah. He shows respect to the captives. But I don't understand why, for however long that they walk in just jungle, by the way, which I will address here in a second, but why he's letting this other guy who, like the bad, letting him mess with all these captives. Again, like, are they religiously valuable or not? And why can't you make up your mind about that?
Middle Eye. That guy's name was Middle Eye.
I don't even.
Yeah, I don't
want to address it. And then we get smallpox, which I'm confused by. And I assume I have to talk about it. Okay.
Yeah. You're the expert, sir. Yes.
Okay. That's concerning.
I'm just sitting here in awe of your expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gibson was asked about the Europeans, because I just wrote here, LOL, the Europeans. When interviewed, he doubled down. I don't know why I did that, but he said that it's meant to be in 1511, which I'm pretty sure is still too early, but okay. Yeah. So this is Mel Gibson's attempt to be like, this is like the first boots on the ground, is what they did.
Like they were already in sorry shape, and then the Spaniards came. Yeah.
But why would they have smallpox, Karen?
That's an excellent question.
Because it's insanely clear that that's smallpox, right? Like if he did anything historically well, it's smallpox.
Yeah. The sores and and.
Why do they already know about it? Why do they already know it's contagious? Because they keep telling them no one touched the little girl.
Yeah, and they push her away with like a stick.
Yeah, and then she goes like full witch mode and starts like, you know, saying some really disturbing things.
About a jaguar.
About a jaguar. He's among us. I didn't know what to make of that situation. I tried to cast it from my mind while watching the rest of the movie. Why is smallpox in here, Karen? Can you please explain that to me? Because I don't understand.
I don't know. I was led to believe that that's a European disease that came over with the Europeans, and
that is also what my actual degrees have told me.
Yeah.
Mel Gibson seems to differ, though. Seems like a plight brought about for killing people. I don't know. So there's that. Smallpox. And there's this mention of prophecy throughout this entire movie, and it seems to me, by multiple things, is that everyone is talking about the Quetzalcoatl prophecy that I don't think you could find a self-respecting historian born in the last 70 years that would tell you that that thing ever happened, ever. And yet, here Mel Gibson is with the access to millions and access to experts that he doesn't ask. He just runs with it. And I assume he's trying to tell the viewer, we already know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But why? Why do we keep lying about this, Karen? Why? Stop saying this. All listeners, please stop perpetuating this ridiculous myth that...
Well, explain what the myth is so that, yeah.
Okay. Oh, boy. So the myth is that the Aztecs... Okay, sorry, I should say. If we're going to have smallpox, I think it's safe to say that he's trying to talk about the Aztecs and got it horribly wrong with the Mayans, because I don't think I can talk about the rest of this movie without getting that just out of the way.
Okay.
Because there's a very big discrepancy. For viewers, I told Karen this earlier, it would be like making a historically accurate movie about Columbus, and the reason why he didn't find India is because his 5G on his iPhone let him down. Is essentially how outrageous of a mistake it is.
Yeah, it's about 500 years.
So, yeah, exactly. So that's
500-600 years. Yeah.
So anyway, the prophecy is this. It's Cortez never writes about this himself, which is important because Cortez liked to boast and write back a lot. Mm-hmm. But later, kind of, I'm going to quote somebody here, and I hate that I don't remember, but like rosy-eyed conquistadors looking back at what they already have, seeing the result of everything, start to look for some sort of justification as to why they were able to, conquer the Aztecs. And this idea comes about that the Aztecs, and this is really convenient, had a prophecy where Quetzalcoatl would come back embodied as a white man, and when he would come back, it was time for Montezuma to give up the keys of the kingdom and give it back to him. And so Montezuma, being afraid to give up his power to a higher calling of literal white people, was so blinded by his religiosity that's why he let the conquistadors into Tenochtitlan, which is very stupid, and because it doesn't make any sense. The way that I tell my students is, imagine if UFOs landed on top of the White House. Are you not going to let them in? It doesn't seem like they're asking, and I think that what anyone would do is to try to be like, hey, man, can we talk this out? And to that same point, it's kind of the same as UFOs show up to the U.S. Capitol and say, hey, you want to do anything about those crafty Russians? Because that's ultimately what the Spaniards do. They show up to these surrounding city-states and they're like, hey, are you kind of done paying the taxes? And everyone's like, yeah. It's like, you want to go kill them? They're like, yeah. And we see this huge dissonance after this because, after the conquest, a lot of, quote unquote Aztecs are kind of like, hey, so like, we're both warriors, so like, where's my cut? And the Spaniards are like, No. You killed your own people because you're a traitor. And to this day, by the way, in like Mexican vernacular, I say Mexican intentionally, malinchista, so Malinchin is the translator for Hernan Cortez, malinchista means traitor. So they're looking at her as a traitor, and like, what did she do? She's like, I'm Mayan. I don't care about any of these things. This guy, I was forced into slavery. I don't understand how I'm a traitor. And so this prophecy ultimately gives this idea like this should have happened and would have happened, and they knew about it, and they're doing nothing. They're just like blinded by whatever depiction of their religion is in this movie, and that's why they let eventually the Spaniards come and conquer them all. Does that answer your question?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
It seems like, It seems I don't want to alarm you, but it seems like Mel Gibson had an agenda.
Whoa, that's a hot take. Yeah. So then we get into this lime mining.
Oh yeah.
So again, I'll tackle this from two different sides, right? So there has been historical, and I use historical lightly here, work that would suggest that it is possible through so much lime mining, which the Mayans used for their foundations because it was very light, that they could have corrupted the soil around the area, and that's what led to their collapse. But that's the Mayans, which means they've already collapsed for like 500 years by now.
Right.
The Aztecs, on the other hand, we do have records where we know that they would cover their pyramids in lime because it has that kind of crystal-y component, right? So you're walking into the valley of Mexico, and you're looking down, and these pyramids in the middle of this lake are gleaming in the sunlight.
Right.
I don't understand what they were doing in this movie, though, because one guy coats one pyramid in it, and then all the other pyramids are very clearly red. So I don't know what they were doing with or about that. And I don't see why it's fair that he gets to say, oh, yeah, both of them, even though they were hundreds of years apart.
Yeah. Do you think he knew that they were 100 years apart and he just didn't care?
Hundreds.
Or do you think that he
I think when someone explained to him, that the Mayans and the Aztecs were not the same, he said, psh.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
Yeah. So it'd be like, in the United States, we have, the Sioux, who are the Plains Indians.
Sure.
And then we have, the East Coast
Right.
folks. And then we have, like, the Nez Perce and the others who are way out on the West Coast. And they didn't really interact with each other. They didn't really, there's not a whole lot of, some of them were hunters and gatherers, like the Nez Perce, and the Sioux were very obviously were buffalo centric, right?
Sure.
And the folks on the East Coast were more agricultural, right? Growing stuff, and it would be like, hey, let's do a movie about the Sioux, and they're like, cool. But let's bring in all of these things about the Nez Perce and all of that, because they're all the same, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all the same.
Well, not
they're
just
just
that,
native
but,
people,
like,
and all of this, and just like combine them into one that doesn't make any sense for any of them. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, because to your example, it wouldn't just be like what you said. It would be like, okay, now let's like just reincarnate all like the early Mississippian tribes that were all agricultural based, and that's like why they don't survive a lot of the things, right? Because the disease obviously is going to spread way faster.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, let's just resuscitate these dead, tribes too, these dead cultures, to fit a weird narrative that I have to modify texts to even remotely justify. And then the whole prophecy with Quetzalcoatl, that's very clearly Aztec. So why did you force them all to speak Mayan? They still speak Nahuatl in Mexico. I mean, they do. Tenoch Huerta with, Wakanda Forever, he's bringing a lot of attention to all this kind of stuff. So, I mean.
And the one guy is it Raul, the Zero Wolf guy?
Zero Wolf. What about him?
Is because I was reading in IMDb, and one of them, like, actually is.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, I mean, like a Yucatec Mayan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these people are still around, and that's why I get so annoyed when people make it seem like it's this harmless crime, because it's like, no, these people are already secondhand citizens in their respective countries because of conquest to this day. And then you're going to make something like this where you're like, well, whatever, man. I mean, we'll just combine all of your whatever. It doesn't matter. You guys are all the same. You all talk funny and, look a certain way. So that's why I hate I hate you for making me watch this, and then I hate this movie. And then they talk about, by the way, that there's a city, a stone city.
Stone City?
A stone city made of stones. And everybody's like, there's no way.
Where on earth did they get all of these stones?
Exactly, stone. Although I will say that according to most estimates of like LiDAR and stuff like that, I believe, let's say 10 to be safe, but I believe it's 12. You could have been within 12 miles of the Mayan civilization and not come across a major city. That's also roughly the horizon. So if you've ever looked into the horizon, sorry if that's a hot take for any of our listeners, but if you ever look into the horizon, you would see a pyramid of some kind, some sort of civilization. Oh, and by the way, they covered them in lime to make them gleam in the sunlight. And you're okay with showing that they definitely did use lime to do that, but not that these people would have seen a city
made of stone. Yes. I don't know how they would have seen a city with all those trees.
I don't know why they have a village in so many trees. I don't know how any of them are surviving. Much less warriors worthy of sacrifice to prevent eclipse that they know about. We have to chip away at this thing.
All right.
There wisely.
We gotta bring this around to an end point here.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Are you ready?
Okay. Real quick.
Yeah.
I think it is outrageous that they have somebody in the city using all three primary colors and everyone wears 5 shades of tan. It looks like a Zack Snyder movie. Random children fighting over meat was strange. Everyone is praying to the same gods. They all use Mayan gods, yet are blown away by any ritual to those gods, which I'm kind of confused about. The art on the pyramid walls is definitely not Mayan. The most accurate depiction of what a Mayan probably would have looked like is actually Zero Wolf.
With the jawbones?
The jawbones guy. That part probably not, but everything else, his respect for the captives, his ritual bloodletting when he lets the captives up, because the Mayans, a lot more than the Aztecs, were a lot more focused on ritual bloodletting. Mm-hmm. So, a common one that we know of is that you would pierce your penis, and then that blood you would use, because ultimately what these sacrifices were, hey, listen, I didn't write this. Ultimately, what these sacrifices were is the more painful that you make it, the more that your sacrifice means, and the more that the blood from that sacrifice is going to mean to these gods.
Oh, so they wouldn't just directly stab him in the heart, is what you're saying?
Yes, but that is Aztec, and there's debate as to how often that sincerely happened. Nothing on the scale depicted in this movie at all. And Mayans knew about eclipses. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why Mel Gibson is gatekeeping eclipses, because I doubt that these people are sworn to secrecy of but don't say it, because if we time it just right, you guys can play a fun little game in the back of the pyramid, and we can brainwash these people that are, I don't know what the sounds or movements they were having or doing with the pyramid, but it wasn't good.
Yeah, no, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
All right, so the question that I always end with what is the value of this movie for a classroom? Should we show it to our students? Do we show it as a kind of like Goofus and Gallant kind of thing? Hey, don't do this. Hey, this is 100% wrong. Or do we just say, hey, why don't we skip this? And so we rate it on the OWL system because wise owls. See, and so on a scale of 1 to 5 owls, hoots, 1 being no, stay the heck away from this, and 5 being absolutely we should show this. What do you think of this movie as a classroom tool?
Well, the classroom tool does change my rating a little bit, because I would say 5 owls as a classroom tool, so you can show people what not to do.
Okay.
And the harm that it genuinely does, because for an entire generation, the only depiction that most people my age have is this about Mesoamerica. And to anyone that says that they don't think of Brad Pitt when thinking of Achilles, they're liars. Because every time I think of Achilles, I think of Brad Pitt because the movie Troy. Was it a great movie? No. But that casting stays with us. That stays in your head for such a long time and influences how you look at these cultures and societies. So I think that with my script and notes right next to it, it'd be a great tool for a teacher to use to show, hey, when there's a quote, find out who wrote that quote. You know, whenever these people are trying to be historically accurate, what historians did they get? We're not expensive people, Karen, right? I mean, I always think if Warner Bros., because I know you guys are listening, you guys follow everything I say.
Of course, yeah. I mean, watch wisely. It's
a hit. Go down to the closest grad school office near you with
those people work real cheap.
2 pizzas, 1 cheese, 1 pepperoni, and 3, if you feel kind, of 2 liters of Mountain Dew, and they will solve all of these moronic problems that you continue to leave in your movies for what, $30 maybe? I mean, that's what annoys me. It's like, and those kids need it, right? I mean, grad students, we need that money.
Grad students do need money. Yeah.
Even
and
if it's a free
pizza.
meal.
Yes,
we need pizza.
absolutely.
That's the only way I got my thesis done. Yeah, pizza and Mountain Dew. Absolutely.
Right. All right. So you would give it 5.
Yeah. How about you?
I mean, I'm not going to use it in class.
No, you shouldn't.
So, you know, I would say absolutely not. If somebody were to ask me about it, I would certainly share your notes with them and be like, hey, here's someone who
put in the description.
And also I would tell them, check out this episode of Watch Wisely, because it is hot garbage. I don't really recommend anyone would watch this.
Neither do I, by the way, because you asked me if I would use this in the classroom, and I would, but nobody should ever watch this movie ever.
Yeah, and I think that it is, you know, as far as classroom fodder, it is something that's going to be unique to you, and it's for a point that you're proving. Just to like show it, or even scenes of it, that because nothing is really depicted accurately enough that you can be like, oh, but this scene, this is really good. Right. So no, I'm gonna, you know, give it a single hoop because I didn't have a 0 to 5 scale, so I have to give it a single hoop. Okay. Because no, I don't want my students anywhere near this film.
It's a good call. It's a good call. To any students of mine listening, don't watch it without me, or anyone listening. It is 1 hoot unless I am there, and then it's 5 hoots because we can all learn something.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. And with all of these movies, I mean, make sure that you're watching them with a critical eye, and do your due diligence. Google a little bit. It really takes you like a half a second to Google something about this movie before it comes up. Like, man, people really hate this movie. So anyway, thank you, Mau, for coming in and do this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You know, maybe we might need to revisit that Black Panther movie.
Maybe, yeah.
And,
Hot takes for that for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
and until then, let's thanks. I don't have like a closing thing.
Oh, that's
I'm
disappointing.
just like
Okay.
I know we're still relatively new. We don't have double digit episodes yet. We'll come up with something.
Okay.
But until next time, thanks and come back again. And oh yeah, smash the subscribe button. Talk to you later. Bye.